Setting up dark mode is way easier than you think. Setting up your variables correctly, inversing your variables with the appropriate checks, and understanding when to introduce fixed variables can go a long way to making sure that your dark mode is accessible. Let's take a closer look. And if your company needs help with your design system, check out Design System Labs. Come work with me and the team. Now, I hate to be a tough guy, but if your color scales don't look like this, then you are not ready to build out a dark mode. You need options for your dark mode in order to play around with different combinations that will pass color contrast accessibility. And you need enough colors in your scale to look at a color and identify the inverse. Now, some mistakes I see when building out dark mode is not having enough color variables. So one thing I often do see here is just in your grays, only really having 3 gray colors. Because designers will often come to me and they say, oh, I have this color for my page background, this color for my copy, this color for my headings. Then I say, okay, what's the opposite of this gray color right here? And that tends to be where they get stuck, is they didn't build out their enough colors in their scale to give themselves options. They only built enough colors in their color scale based on the individual use cases. So despite the fact that you might not have a role for every one of the colors in your scale on light mode, give yourself some options, give yourself some flexibility. Another mistake I often see designers doing, and if you did this, and that's just going back to the drawing board right away, is eyeballing it. Because you need some type of mathematical, logical approach to take a base color or a default color in this scale and then calculate what the darker shades of this color are and the lighter shades of this color are. Now, it's not as simple as just eyeballing it. It's not as simple as going, yep, that's one, or that's one, that is a lighter one, and then there's a lighter one. Because then you're going to have some inconsistencies in your scale. And your light mode and your dark mode are going to look like a mess. Okay, so if you took that approach, I was just going back to the drawing board. Now, if you've watched any of our other videos by now, you've probably seen me cover this in the past, but I can't hammer it down enough how important it is to set up your color scales correctly. So when it does come time for you to build out a dark mode, that you have faith in your color scales. Okay, so I know it's going to take some time, especially if you have a really complex brand, but trust me, it's better to lay the foundations now than having to redo everything a little bit later on. So in terms of the logical approach to building out your color scales, this is the approach that you should take. So say you have just this base default color here. This is base gray that's associated with your brand. You need darker shades and you need lighter shades. So in order to achieve lighter shades, what I do, I'm going to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room here, and then copy one on this side, is I set the page background to white. And in this right example, I adjust the opacity. So in this case, I set that to 80. Again, you can also do 90 if you want to maximize the number of colors in your color scales to give yourselves a lot of options, but adjust the opacity by a specific interval. So in this case, let's just set it to 80 for now. On this left-hand side, I'm then going to color match because we don't want opacities in our color scale or in our variables. We want raw hex codes. So simply color matched the color which has the opacity to achieve the raw hex code. Let's go another example. So I've set this to 80. Let's now set this to 60. Scroll down or bring another option down and then copy the hex code. So now we're achieving lighter scales, but following a logical process to achieve shades that are based off of our default color. Let's go through one more example. So I set this to 40, bring another option down, and then color match. Now, you're probably wondering, what about achieving darker colors? So for achieving darker colors, I take a black background and I simply bring one over top, bring to front. There we go. Sorry, I'll drop the stroke and copy one. And we're going to do the same thing. Simply adjust the opacity, set that to 80%, and now color match. So now our shades are getting darker because the opacity is on a black background. One more example. Set this to 60, bring another option up, and then color match. So this is how we build out these clean, crisp color scales with dark shades and light shades that are based off of our default color for this scale. And if you didn't go through this type of process when building out your color scales, then dark mode is simply not going to work. So now that my preamble is over, let's look at identifying the colors that will be our first version of dark mode. Okay. Now, one thing I'd like to call out is when you go through this exercise, don't just assume that your dark mode is done. Okay. You still need to go through accessibility testing. You might need to add additional variables based on that and based on the look and feel that you're trying to achieve for your dark mode. So, in terms of choosing the variables for your first version of your dark mode, all you're doing is inversing the colors on your light mode. Let's look at an example. So say this top color here is our text headings on light mode. On dark mode, we're going to inverse that color to start. So then this would be our text headings. Same way going up. So if this same variable here is our surface page on light mode, on dark mode, this here is going to be our surface page. Let's look at a couple more examples. So one more, let's go maybe this one right here. So maybe this one is our text body on light mode. So the third variable up will be our text body on dark mode. Okay, so again, really just inversing the colors in your light mode to achieve that first set of variables for your dark mode. Now, one thing that's nice about having an even number of colors in your color scale here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Is there's kind of like two intersections or two middle points here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to add a quick star here. And we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we add that. So I'm going to, sorry, words are tough today. I'm going to add another star here. So the inverse to achieve that first version of our dark mode, the inverse of this color is this one. And the inverse of this color is this one. Okay. What if you have an odd number of colors in your color scale? And this is a question that I get all the time. Let's take a look at that next. So now, what if you have an odd number of colors in your color scale? How do you find the inverse of that middle color? Now, let's look at a quick example. So say maybe I remove just this one at the bottom here. So now all of a sudden we have 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so now let's identify our default color. So let's say in this case, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, and then 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So this here would be our middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. What's the inverse of this color? Okay, question I get all the time. In terms of setting up your initial dark mode, it ultimately doesn't matter what you pick. You can choose this color, you can choose this color. But personally, when it comes to my variables, what I end up doing is just keeping this color exactly the same as is, because I still need to go through that level of accessibility testing anyway. So if you do have an odd number of colors in your color scale, whatever that middle default value is, where your light and dark mode intersect and there is no inverse, again, choose anything. But my personal preference is really just to keep that color the exact same as it is. Now, there are a lot of use cases where that actually happens in dark mode, whether it happens by accident, where that color should be exactly the same on light mode as it is on dark mode for accessibility purposes, or your brand requires it in order to achieve the look and feel that you're going for. That's what we call a fixed color variable. And we're going to look at that a little bit later on. But first, let's look at an example as how we take a completed variable library to build out our dark mode. So now what I'm working with here, this is really a completed variable library. Okay, this is part of our Build a Design System series. So if you haven't checked that out yet and you want to follow along with me and ultimately build this library and all these great components here on the left-hand side, I would go ahead and I would check out our Build a Design System series. Okay, but again, we're going to be using this library as part of that series in order to showcase how it works in terms of inversing. Now, one thing I would like to call out right away is with all of your components, before you build out a dark mode, you should validate that your light mode colors are accessible. Because if your light mode colors are not accessible and the color combinations of your components are not accessible, it's going to cause you a massive headache. So before you get into dark mode, master light mode, okay? Make sure your colors are accessible. Make sure you have the components that you need. It's just going to make things a whole lot easier. I know from a timeline perspective that can push things back, especially if you're going to rush to get your design system out. But I promise you, focus on your light mode first. Do your accessibility testing before you move into a dark mode. Okay, so let's look at a quick example here. Maybe we're just going to focus on our buttons to start. And one thing I would like to call out is with our Build a Design System series, I haven't tested everything for accessibility yet. So if you're using these color shades and say, hey, it's not accessible, don't yell at me. Okay, so let's go into our mapped collection. Now, I'm using a 3-tiered approach to our design token architecture. Again, I cover that in our Build Design System series, episode 1, but make sure you have either a 2-tier or a 3-tiered approach to your design token architecture, your Figma variables, before you dive into this as well. Okay, so in terms of your dark mode, I tend to add it inside of my mapped collection. Okay, so my mapped collection is the variables that are actually consumed by our components. So just as a quick refresher, in our brand mode, we have all our hex codes really just their purest form. So I can see we have nice clean numbers for our scales. So we're using 100 through to 800. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then an alias, what I've done is I've just assigned those colors a specific role. Again, take a look at our Build a Design System series, episode 1, if you want to learn a little bit more about this process. But again, we're going to add our dark mode to our mapped collection. Okay, so let's then go ahead and set this to dark mode. And now we're just simply going to inverse them. So our neutral 700, this will be our neutral 200. Our neutral 600 is going to become our neutral 300. Our primary default in this case, so maybe let me take a little bit of a step back here, is what I've actually done is I've assigned a specific role name to one of our colors in our alias collection, which is our default, which is just our 500. But I always like to call out what our base brand color is in our scale. Okay, so in this case, it's 500. So let's then go back to our map and look at our 500. So in this case, the opposite of our primary 500s, if we have 8, is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4 is going to be our 400. Okay, so again, we have an even number of colors in our scale, which makes things a little bit easier in terms of finding the alternative. Our action hover in this case is then going to be our 300. Our neutral 400 is going to be our 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So our neutral default. Our information default is going to be our 400. Our success default is going to be our 400. Our warning default is going to be our 400. Our error default is going to be our 400. Our neutral whites, if I ever have a white and a black, I tend to just inverse it right away. So our neutral white will become our neutral black, and our neutral 700 will become our neutral 200. So those are the colors for our text. Let's keep going down the line here. Again, just until we have enough color variables where we can see the inverse of these buttons, okay? So our neutral white is going to be our neutral black, neutral white, neutral black, success 100, success 800, neutral 100, neutral 800, error 100, error 800. Oops, this is broken. So this should have been our, sorry, now I'm going back and finding small bugs here, but this is our warning. And then this will be our warning 800. That happens. Our information 100 will become our information 800. So again, just inversing the colors on our scale. Primary 600, primary 400, primary 700, primary 200, primary 100, primary 800, neutral 400, neutral 600. We're almost there. So then we have our default. So this will then become our 400. Our information default will be our 400. Our success default will be our 400. Warning will be our 400. Error will be our 400. Primary will be our our 300. 700 will become our 200. Neutral white will become our neutral black. So again, just inversing the whites and the blacks. Our 500 will become our 400. So it really is this easy in terms of just setting up your initial dark mode to start, okay? But we're going to look at some of the edge cases very shortly. We're just getting the foundations down. So our primary 200 will become our primary 700, 500, 400. Information default, which is the 500, will become the 400, 400, warning 400, error 400, neutral. Sorry, I'm going pretty quick here. Forgive me. 300, primary 500 will become our 400. 600 will become our 300, and our 500 will become our 400. So hopefully I didn't make any mistakes there, but it really is that simple in terms of setting up your dark mode. Again, you don't need to have a dark mode at your brand collection, at your alias collection, which tends to be where we add additional themes. If you have multiple brands, what we tend to do is add it at the mapped collection. So now that we have a light mode and our initial dark mode, let's play around with the modes with this button component and see what it looks like. Okay, so now that we have our initial dark mode established, let's go ahead and test it out for accessibility. Now, the process that we're going to go through here is what you should do for all of your components. Okay, go through, check every single one of your components after you set your initial dark mode and after you validated that your light mode is already accessible to catch any potential gremlins in your variables, components that might not be accessible with your dark mode that are on your light mode. Okay, so before I do that, one thing I would like to call out here is you don't need a separate component set for dark mode. Okay, you absolutely do not need this. This causes a massive headache for designers because now all of a sudden they have a whole other component that they need to pull from when building their designs. Okay, with the addition of modes, simply just do the mode swapping. It makes life a whole lot easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the page background to the color of our surface page, which in this case here is black. So I'm going to set that page background to black, and I'm going to select both of our frames here and then change it from light to dark. And I can see how all those colors interact. Now, at first glance, I think this looks pretty okay in the grand scheme of things. But one thing we still need to do is go ahead and test all this for accessibility. So next, let's look at if we need to make some changes to our dark mode. Now, right away, you should be testing for your color contrast. So I use this contrast checker plugin here. And what it allows me to do is really just one-click sort of elements like the text. And I can see what the contrast ratio is, if it meets AA or AAA standards. AA, it tends to be what we go for. So I can see here that the color of this text works just fine. Let's check out this one. Same thing. But if we test out below, what's one thing that we noticed here is that for our transparent hover state, it doesn't pass the normal text level, which would be our body medium semi-bold in this case, which is 16. Okay, so what we then need to go ahead and do is change this variable. So this is surface action hover 2. Okay, so let's go back into our variables here. Now you can either take two approaches. You can change the color of the font or you can change the color of the background. Pick your evil, I guess you could say, whichever one you prefer to test out based on the look and feel that you're going for. So our surface action hover, in this case on dark mode, oops, what is this? So this is, let me double check something here. So this is our surface action hover 2. Okay, so I can see that our text is a little bit lighter, but in this case, we don't really have a darker shade to go off of. So if I was to select this 700 as an alternate, if I pull back up the contrast checker plugin, I can see that gets even worse. Okay, so we don't want to do that. In this case, what we can then do is we can either then go back and introduce a darker color for our dark mode. Okay, this is where adding colors and building out your scale is super important, because in dark mode, you might need to add additional colors to your color scale that you did not think about with your light mode. Okay. Or what we could do is we can make this color a little bit lighter. So our text action hover. So let's go into our text. So you see this here. So I can see that our text action hover is our 300. Maybe let's go ahead and set that to our 100. And let's do the same. Maybe we'll do our 200 to start. See how that is. So let's go into our contrast plugins. Sorry, I got too many modes happening here. Now let's see if that works. Okay, so now I can see that it passes the AA, which is industry standard, but it still passes the AAA. If you did need to pass the AAA, then you could go ahead and set that to your lighter shade, okay, in order to achieve that. One thing too is we also need to do it for our icons. So I can see that our icon action hover, let's make sure that these are aligned. So let's go to our text action hover. Text action hover is now the 200. Let's check out our icon action hover is still the 300. Let's then go ahead and set that to the 200. And now this would pass our accessibility standards. Okay. So in terms of completing your dark mode is you really do need to go component by component to test everything for accessibility, to identify where your current color combinations or any potential combination of your existing colors would not work for accessibility, to identify if you would need to add additional colors to your color scale. So one concept I would like to cover with our light mode, dark mode is the idea of colors that cannot change because your brand standards state that they cannot change. A great example of this is the Royal Bank of Canada, like my former employer. They had a blue that couldn't change on dark mode. It had to stay the exact same as it was on light mode and dark mode. Okay. So if that's the case for you, one thing you should be doing is inside of your brand collection, is really, in this case, maybe if this 500 here is our, our UI collective purple, we could rename this to default or something like 500 fixed. And that fixed is going to signify that this color can absolutely not change. So everywhere where we have that 500, so that primary 500 on dark mode, it would then need to be the primary 500. Again, we would have to do the same in our alias level as well. So 500 fixed. You can also call it default, so on and so forth. But I would now need to know that this 500 fix needs to stay the exact same. Okay, so it can't change. So take stock of your brand. Understand even if the colors in your logo, and you see it all the time, is colors and logos on light mode are slightly different on dark modes, that designers don't need to go through this. Okay, but that's a use case that you do need to be thinking about. By now, you're probably thinking, oh, dark mode's pretty easy. But I'm about to throw some wrenches into things. Because one thing you need to realize is that just because a variable that you've set on dark mode works for one component doesn't mean it's going to work for another component. I'll show you what I mean. So even for something like your text body, right? On dark mode, I can see it set to text body. If I go into my contrast, I can see that this passes everything. This label on itself is super accessible. Then if I go into defined field and I hit our text body, all of a sudden it's the same variable, but because it's on a different background, means that it's no longer fits the normal text AA contrast. Panic, right? Now we have a huge problem on our hands because all of a sudden the variables that work on dark mode for some components don't work in dark mode for other components. Now, before you get to the version that I'm about to get to in the next part of this video, or the option that I'm about to get to in the next part of this video, try out different combinations. Okay, try out different combinations for your text, try out different combinations for your background in this case, to try to find a version that's accessible on light mode and dark mode that works for multiple components. But there is always going to be a scenario where, if I go back to our, where's our radio button here? There is always going to be a scenario where you can't find a color combination that works for every single one of your components. It's going to be pretty rare, but you are going to run into that scenario, okay, with your dark mode. Now, let's go through a quick example of that and how to alleviate that next. So an example as to where we ran into that in the past, where we couldn't find a color combination that would work for all components, is a client that we worked on pretty recently. Again, I can't show you the design to that because, again, it's all confidential. But we ran into a scenario where we had issues with the footer, where according to their brand spec, as they wanted the footer to be black on light mode, but on dark mode, they wanted it to be a darker gray in this case. So they didn't want it to be full light, which would be the inverse. They kind of wanted to have that look and feel. Now, a footer is kind of like one of those secondary components in the grand scheme of things. There's a ton of components that go into components that would then go into your footer. So we couldn't find a combination of colors that would work for all those other components that would get nested into the footer component. Okay. So instead of it looking like this, they wanted it to look like this. And we just could not find a combination that would work across all of our different components. So what we actually had to do is introduce a fixed variable for this, specific to the footer. Now, this is also what you might know as a component specific token. I know in the past I've said we want to avoid component specific tokens at all costs. This is one of those options, or one of those scenarios where introducing a component specific token is acceptable in order for it to meet standards on dark mode without having too many impacts across other components. So let's take a look at how to set that up next. Okay, so now how do you handle this problem that we had just identified? Okay, so we're actually going to introduce a component specific token specifically for the footer. In the past, as I've talked about, you do not need component-specific tokens. If you're just building one theme, so just light mode, you absolutely do not need component-specific tokens. If you have multiple brands, again, you don't need component-specific tokens. Component-specific tokens are really, really the last resort, okay? You want to simplify the number of variables that are in your library for light mode and dark mode. Could you imagine how complex your design system would be? And you have all these 40 or 50 components as part of our Build a Design System series so far. If you had groupings for all these components, okay, when in theory you can group them in terms like text, surface, and apply more general variables in order to keep things consistent. Okay, so I just wanted to preamble with that. So what you can do if you run into this scenario where you can't find a color combination that's going to fit, is sort of choose the lesser of all evils in terms of the component to apply that fixed token to. Okay, so in this example, our lesser of all evils, instead of changing the color of the text, the color of a form field for like newsletter sign up, so on and so forth, was to simply just change, again, because the text and the form fields would have downstream impacts because those are used everywhere, is simply just change the color of the footer because it's used once across all the pages. It's not used in all these different spots, less impacts. Okay, so do that like plus minus analysis, pros cons analysis in terms of what component to apply the fixed variable to or component specific variable to. So in this case, what we did then is we created a new color variable that we just called component specific, footer, and then surface. What this allowed us to do is break from this normal convention where we couldn't find that color combination that would fit, and then apply the variable that would work on light mode and dark mode, and then apply that to the components. Now, we haven't gotten into footer components yet as part of our Build a Design System series. We will get to that in a future episode, so be sure to drop a subscribe for that. So let's go ahead and look here. So if in terms of our past example, on light mode, they wanted the dark. So surface, create the alias. Let's maybe go neutral, 700. And then on dark mode, in the case of our neutral, that would have been a much lighter. So it would have been like a neutral 200. But again, it didn't really work with their brand. So they wanted it like a little bit darker. So this case, it would be like that 400. Okay. And that's how we would set it up and deal with these scenarios where you run into a combination of colors that won't work for every component.